there is need to democratize gender, and there is need for women to keep on fighting for the decolonization of gender, so that women have right to all these other spaces, public space, so that women can work, women can choose to work, or they can choose to be mothers, but they should have that right to choose whatever they want. So it's a process that is part of the unfinished business of the liberation struggle. I think gender equality is one of the biggest unfinished business.
Imagine Africa before colonialism. I can't really have a picture that would come in my mind and define to me life in Africa before colonialism. I don't even want to rely on images that are today available to us, as I know that most of them may be fabricated to support reasons why colonialism was necessary and good for Africa. But I assume that we can all be interested to listen to Africans who are somehow dealing in their daily life with issues related to pre-colonialism or even post-colonialism when they tell us what they know about that time. This show is about women's situation during pre-colonialism time and what decolonization means to them. My name is Thierry Francis Mbabane. Women are the most who have suffered from colonialism. To understand that, we need to look on how they lived with their families before and during the time of colonialism. Before, the African culture gave them equal opportunities as men to build their future. Girls and boys did similar activities. Women and men helped each other in their communities. All until when colonialism came to Africa and changed that harmony. Many experts believe that gender reforms started with colonialism and led to restructure African culture in order to have power on the natives' behavior. Women and men were viewed differently. In this new theory, women were domesticated. For example, they couldn't go in public places. They couldn't become leaders, and they couldn't anymore work to gain income. African women participated also in the fight against colonialism. Unfortunately, when the fight was won, imperious African men took advantage of the existing chaos to carry on the gender prospects brought to them by white men. As a result today, women still don't have same rights as men to be leaders in their community, to be figures in public places, or to choose, among other options, to be wives. They think that in these days of neo-colonialism, the only way to achieve full independency is decolonization, and most of all, gender decolonization. Faith Mukwesha is a guest today. Faith is a researcher in Gender Studies Department and also a teacher of gender in African literature. We are happy to have you again in the studio of Radio Robin Hood. And today we want to tackle the issues about colonialism. And when colonialism came to Africa, who was the African woman?
Before the colonization, African women we had fluid gender roles. There was space for women to be leaders, to be economically empowered, their own ways of doing things that made life more easier for women, and also that made it more harmonious for the families. But during the colonial period, this kind of life was disrupted. The fluid gender roles were disrupted because the colonial settlers came with the idea that women must be domesticated. Yet,
before we tackle the issues of colonialism, would you mind to tell a little bit what you mean that life was fluid for a woman that time before colonialism?
Okay, what I mean by fluid gender roles is that women, they could do things that men do. So there was not this thing that a woman cannot do this.
For
example, women would be gatherers. They would go out in the forest. They would look for fruits, vegetables, firewood. They would go to the fields, and they would look for different kinds of vegetables and plant whatever they wanted to plant. If they were building a house, women would have a part. They cut grass, the men cut wood, the men put the poles, the women do the plastering, the men put the roof, the women put the grass, and the women do the floors and so forth. So you can see that there was also sharing of responsibilities, but working together. So it was more community. And also, men could also do some things that women could do. So when we say fluid, we are saying that there was not this rigid idea that a woman can do this, a man can do this, a woman cannot do this, which was really important because it brought this harmony in the communities during that time.
You want to say that African culture were like equal?
It empowered women, yeah.
Yeah.
There was this community, you work together as a community. If you are a man and woman, a family, you work together as a husband and wife. It was based on love, love one another. It was not based on, like now, on the idea of that relationships between men and men are defined as oppressive. So it was not defined as oppressive. It was defined as love. They love each other and they build a family together, and they can share responsibilities within their home without saying that, okay, a woman cannot do this. Then if it comes to leadership, there were also spiritual spaces that gave women ability to be a leader. For example, in Zimbabwe, if we had Nehanda, she was a woman, but because she was a spiritual woman, she became a leader of the first Chimrenga, fighting against colonialism. So you find that she was leading even men, together with Kaguya and other men. So there was space for women to become leaders. They could be chiefs, they could be goddesses, they could be mediums, important people in the communities, and lead, and people would come to consult them. So that's what I mean, that it was fluid. They were fluid gender roles. There was not this rigidity that a woman cannot do this. We even have the women hunters, women going to hunt that time.
Why is it that today no one is talking about these stories?
Yeah, today they talk about as if Africa was, and remember the idea why Africa was colonized was that it was uncivilized. So it was a way of civilizing them. So you can't talk about it, because if you talk about these things, then it means you are confirming that African culture had its own values and beliefs, and it had its own way of life, its own kind of civilization that was developing. So that's why these things are silent, which is important that we talk about them so that we can build on what we had, because history is important so that you know where you come from, and from that knowing where you come from, you know where you are now, and then you know where you are going. So it is important that we talk about these things.
Then colonialism came in.
Yes, and then the settlers came. Colonialism, the whole idea was about territorial expansion. And in the case of Africa, the 1884 Berlin Conference, where they were doing the petitioning of Africa, sharing Africa, different European countries. So, and then they come, and it was about territorial expansion, but it was also about extraction of resources. So if you want to extract resources, how do you go into another territory and just start extracting resources? It means you have to give yourselves power. So they gave themselves power and authority over those native people. And by doing that, it was important that they have to restructure the culture. They have to colonize the culture as well, African culture, so that it becomes more like Europeans. So that's where we start having these problems whereby new gender concept is brought to Africa, whereby there are rigid roles for men. Men, there's masculinity, femininity, men do this, women do this. So it comes with colonialism. So in other words, we can safely argue that the gender roles and the concept even of gender is a colonial concept that it was imported to Africa. And when it was imported there, it disrupted African gender roles and functions. So how did it do this? I think we can talk about that's when we have the domestication of women, that now women are supposed to be in the home. They cannot go outside. And the men are supposed to be outside and working. So, and then the men are even taken from the villages. They're supposed to be working in farms and in industries that the settlers were building. So by doing that, there's a lot of disruption that was done. And then there was a lot of changes now to the way of life of the African natives. So that's where you find that now that's where it's said women cannot be leaders, women cannot be public places, women cannot go and work, women cannot have economic power and so forth. So these are not like things that were there obvious. These are things that come with colonialism. So that's why it is important to talk about them, so that we understand that how can we rebuild our societies, how can we go back to those cultural values that were important, and so that we can build our societies in a harmonious way.
If you have to pick few major changes that happened with colonialization towards women, for example, which one would you pick?
I would pick the economical disempowerment of women economically. For example, I come from Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, women had their own field, whereby it was said this is a field for the woman. They had their own granaries where they would put their produce from the farms. So they'd even own cows, which were at that moment economic valuable material. So why do I pick on that? Because with colonialism comes the idea that all these things belong to the men. And women don't own anything. So the infantilization of women comes with colonialism, that women are like infants, they own nothing, they have to change their names, everything comes with colonization. For example, in the case of South Africa, Zimbabwe, Southern Africa, where I come from, I can safely talk about that.
Any other pick?
And then I can also pick the idea that women cannot be leaders. It also comes with colonialism, that women can't be leaders. And the sad thing is that some of these things have been maintained even after Africa became liberated. And our leaders keep on pushing them. So that's why it is important to talk about them, that, okay, these are not like, if we were fighting for the liberation of Africa, political liberation, it means we also need to decolonize these gender roles that came with colonialism. There's no reason for us to maintain them. So if we can argue that, then it means women can become leaders without any problem. If you see at the moment, it's very difficult for African women to become even presidents, even in politics. It's because it's coming from there. So if we go back to our own culture and use it as a basis to build the struggle on and push for women's rights to leadership, then we started there.
Why is it so that colonizers decided to just create this kind of a woman in that society?
It was one, they were importing what they were doing here. And for example, Britain, in the case of Southern Africa, Britain was importing its Victorian gender ideals, Victorian gender roles to the colonies that they were colonizing. And it was also a way of civilizing, according to them. It was a process of civilizing. The natives were considered to be barbaric. Women are doing men's job. The men are doing women's job. There's no division. It's not clear. So for them, it was a process of civilizing people. But it's just interesting that when they were doing that process of civilizing, destroying the egalitarian gender ideals that we had at that time, they were also in the process trying to create a man who becomes a worker for the colonizer. They were trying to create a man who can become a leader in their own communities, so that they can be able to use them to oppress the other people and to oppress the women. So it was, and then it was also an economic issue, because they wanted the men to go and work and to produce for the settlers, and women to stay at home and do double now to produce for the children and to take care of the families. So it was cultural and it was economic.
And how did women respond to this in that time?
I think if you read some novels written by African writers, for example, Zimbabwe, if you read Yvonne Vera, Butterfly Burning, she talks about women who were challenging this. When they said women don't come to the cities, they must be taking care of children in the rural areas. We have women who went to those cities. When they said you can't work, we had women who go and start their own entrepreneurial jobs, selling things and so forth. So we have always had strong women who have always been rebelling against some of these structures that were being imposed on them. In the rural areas also, they continued to rebel in their own way, living their lives the way they want. Although they ended up coming with this idea of headmen, a headman who would enforce those policies that they wanted, so that women would do exactly as the settlers wanted. So they created this headman, then they created this chieftainship, and they created all these other structures so that they could keep on oppressing and imposing their ideas on African women.
Can we just think in this way that especially those women you mentioned, those are elite in this conflict, in this fight. But let's assume in a small family, a woman and a man and children. If I understand well, if I look at the whole picture, it looks like there is a kind of fight. There is kind of conflict of responsibilities, conflict of who has to do this. So a family was really like in a conflict.
There was not much conflict, because I think the African people tried to maintain their cultures, because even if the settlers were imposing this, up to now, I think Africans are not confused about who they are and what they are supposed to do to take care of their families. But there were obviously problems in some cases, especially during the urbanization period, where women moved to the cities, and when they were having relationships with men or getting married to men, there were conflicts, because some women wanted to go to school. The idea was that the man is the one who is supposed to go to school. The man is the one who is supposed to have a career, to have a profession during that time. So there were conflicts in other families because of that, because if the woman wants to go to school, it became a problem. For example, I think that novel that I give you of Yvonne Vera, Butterfly Burning, it depicts these conflicts. For example, if a character, their wife wants to be a nurse, and the husband doesn't want it, he wants the wife to stay in the house, because he has been taught that being a man, it means your wife stay in the house, she should not work, you should work and provide for the wife. But this young woman also has her own ambitions to have a career, so it creates conflict. And in that sense, it creates real conflict, because the husband ends up going to look for another woman whom he thinks is a better woman, who doesn't want to go to school. And then some ended up divorcing. And in this case, it was tragic. The young woman ends up killing herself, burning herself, because the husband had rejected her because of the idea that she wanted to go to school. She wanted to become a nurse in order to help support the family. So it was not like it didn't create conflicts. It did create conflicts in some cases. And if you read Tsitsi Dangarembwa's Neva's Conditions, she also talked about struggles in families between girls and sons. Because the girls want to go to school as well. Family says, we are going to pay fees for the son because he's the one who is going to be prepared to work in the public space. The woman does not. So it created problems in that sense, especially in terms of education and in terms of careers.
And then men, mostly, they sit together and find a solution about colonialization and start a new life, start a new period. What was the role of a woman in this discussion or onward?
Women participated in the liberation movements. They went to fight as fighters fighting for liberation. They also participated in most of these preparations for meetings for the struggle. For example, South Africa, there was Mkhonto where there were many women who were involved even in underground movement, participating in the fight. In Zimbabwe too, from first Chimurenga, second Chimurenga, there were women who were very active, actually on the forefront is fighting. So they did participate, which is a sign that colonialism failed to pacify them.
And why is it so that especially after colonialism, we still have lots of problems connected to colonialism when we're talking about women life, women's situation, while we had women fighting also during that time?
Exactly. That's the problem that after liberation fights, after independence, the men tried to re-domesticate women, to make them domesticated again, so that men could be in the public and become leaders in politics, in business, in everything. So that's why the legacy of colonialism is one of oppression of women. Is one of inequality between men and women, and it's one also of denying women the right to public space. So that's why at this moment of final phases of decolonization struggle, there is need to democratize gender, and there is need for women to keep on fighting for the decolonization of gender, so that women have right to all these other spaces, public space, so that women can work, women can choose to work, or they can choose to be mothers, but they should have that right to choose whatever they want. So it's a process that is part of the unfinished business of the liberation struggle. I think gender equality is one of the biggest unfinished business.
And of course, I think it's another form of fight. It's another form of tackling issues when it comes to women. So, would you tell me a little bit about what is happening now with decolonization, especially when it comes to gender issues or other issues that regard women?
Yeah, what is happening now is, for example, we have this decolonization movement going on now. In Africa, in South Africa, has been taking a leading role in that fight that Africans need to be in control of their structures. For example, they start with education. Africans need to have access to educational institutions, especially higher education. We find that you don't have many Africans in some cases in South Africa. You don't have many women in those higher institutions. So there's this struggle that women must have access to higher education, because when they have access to higher education, that it means it's a step in the right direction to access to political institutions, to access to companies and in government and so forth. So right now there is this struggle which is combining men and women for the decolonization of Africa. But I think in that struggle, women are pushing for the decolonization of gender.
Many people, many documents are also talking about this neo-colonialization which is going on. And talking about decolonization, it's like a kind of saying that now we have to stop everything. We have to be free and we have to do everything on our own way. Is it so?
Yeah. Decolonization that is going on now is about the claim to power. It's also about changing the way we think. Decolonization is about the way we think, because most of these things that we do is because of the way we think, which we have been trained to think through education. So that's why you find that the starting point is about decolonizing knowledge, going back to our native philosophies, our native ways of knowing, other ways of knowing, other ways of being in the world, from learning from these different cultures. The argument that we are having is that maybe European way is not the universal, it's not the only way of knowing, it's not the only way of living our lives, it's not the only way of being in the world. So there are other ways of knowing. So let's not center European way of knowing only. For example, you go back to African culture, we have Ubuntu philosophy. The whole of Africa, we have this idea of I am okay if you are okay. We have this idea of collectivity, not individualism. So European sense is about the individualism. So it's not the only way. And we are seeing that it's failing. So maybe it has reached its brick wall. So let's go to other kinds of knowing, other kinds of knowledge, and learn from there. So I think that's what decolonization is all about. It's about claiming the right to be in the world in a different way.
What are obstacles?
Obstacles is that like any struggle, it's not going to be easy. You can produce knowledge, and then those who are in control of distribution of knowledge will say this is not knowledge. You say all the other ways of knowing are not knowledge, and then they can silence you. They silence through not even publishing, using those articles from Africa, not using theories that are developed from somewhere else. So it's a big struggle, but we don't stop, because the struggle is that we find ways of using that knowledge. So right now, like what is happening in South Africa, students are demonstrating that we want to know about, to learn from what has been written by people who are like us. And the people who are using the Afrocentric way of thinking. So by doing that, if we can start pushing you knowledge in our own institutions, to applying what has been written by our own professors, our own doctors, and our own educationists, it's a first step to do that than keeping on importing knowledge from somewhere else and imposing it. So, and then when you are in Europe, we work hard to produce knowledge about Africans as well, so that we teach about it and we talk about it like we are doing now. Then people know that no, Africa is just not a dead place of people with sick, with suffering from poverty. There are other things. There is a civilization there which is also developing. There is knowledge production. There are other things that the whole world can benefit from.
You personally, you belong to some ideas, you belong to some movement in this fight?
I'm an African feminist, a decolonial feminist. Like I believe in this idea of decolonizing Africa, and now I'm working on decolonizing gender. How can we decolonize gender so that we go back, we retrieve those values which were important and build on that, so that we can have another way of men and women relations. My idea is that this idea of defining gender from a European feminist, which is based on oppression, is not the same way that we see the relations between men and women from Africa. We see it in a different way, like I talked to you, that it's based on love. So how about we start looking at relationship between men and women based on love, not based on oppression. So if we look at it from based on love, then of the view of an egalitarian genderism, whereby we've got men and women living in a perfect society as equals. It's a utopia, but all knowledge and all improvements start from utopic imagination, and then how do you make it real? I think that's where I'm coming from, that there is need to decolonize gender.
And then your idea, I guess it's still in the starting point?
Yeah, it's still in the process. I'm working on a book. I'm just starting to work on this idea.
Thank you very much. We'll be looking forward to read it when it's ready. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Welcome.